Well, hello, class. How are you today? Now, did you know I am a wilderness man and I'm not very good at all this technology? Did you know that I already recorded this whole lesson and then I deleted it? Oh my goodness, was I mad at myself. So, I'm reading this story to you for the second time today. And as you remember, we were waiting to find out about Lewis and Clark's adventures. So we're going to find out more about their adventures right now. Here we go. On July 19th, 1804, William Clark found himself at the edge of an ocean. It was not the Pacific Ocean, the vast sea to the west that Clark and his friends hoped to reach. In fact, it was not an ocean of water at all. It was a large, flat area of land covered in grass called a prairie. A prairie goes on as far as the eye can see, just like the ocean. Clark was out hunting for the expedition and spotted some elk tracks, which he followed up the hill. He later described what he found at the top. "I came suddenly into an open and boundless prairie. I could not see the edges in any direction. This was so sudden and entertaining that I forgot the elk I had been following. Clark had reached the eastern edge of what today we call the Great Plains. Now, this is also called the grasslands. A prairie is the same as grasslands. Do you remember that you learned about that in the animals and habitats that Rattenborough taught you about? Yeah, so a prairie is the same as the grasslands. Where was I? Wild grass as high as Clark's knees stretched out and blew gently in the wind and interrupted every so often by a hill or a grove of trees. That sea of grass stretched all the way to the distant Rocky Mountains, which it would take the Corps of Discovery weeks more to reach. During those weeks, the explorers saw many plants and animals new to them. Meriwether Lewis was especially fascinated, very interested, by the pronghorn antelope, called pronghorns for short. He tried to get close enough to draw pictures of them, but the pronghorns always ran away. Pronghorns have incredibly sharp eyesight and a strong sense of smell to warn them of approaching danger. When Lewis finally came close to a pronghorn and got a good look at the long curved horns that give the animals its name, he wrote, "The speed of this animal is equal, if not superior, to that of the finest racing horse. The pronghorn is my favorite of all the animals we have encountered so far." The explorers were also astonished by this cute little prairie dog, a tiny rodent. These little creatures, related to squirrels, live together by the thousands in what the men call prairie dog towns. The prairie dog towns consisted of underground tunnels that sometimes stretched out for miles across the flat plains. I keep losing my place. "We have to catch one of these to send back to President Jefferson," William Clark declared. But catching a prairie dog was not so easy. One prairie dog, standing guard above its hole in the ground, saw the men coming and chirped a high-pitched warning. Instantly, all the creatures divided down into the ground. The men dug down after them, but found that the tunnels went down more than 6 feet below the surface, spreading out in all directions with emergency exits to escape their many predators: hawks, coyotes, and snakes, all of whom considered prairie dogs to be delicious snacks. Clark wrote down their findings about the prairie dogs and pronghorn antelope in his journal. Still following the Missouri River across the prairie, the expedition moved on. Soon they began to meet new tribes of Native Americans. Most were friendly and welcoming, especially one tribe called the Yankton Sioux. A few of the Yanktons guided the travelers for a few days, but then said, "You are coming to the land of the Teton Sioux. We will not be able to guide you any longer." Lewis and Clark had already heard about the Teton Sioux. President Jefferson wanted them to become friends with the Teton Sioux. However, the Teton Sioux were not interested in trade with the settlers and did not want to allow Lewis and Clark on their land. One September afternoon, John Coulter, one of the expedition's best hunters, was following the tracks of an animal. Coulter dismounted from his horse to look more closely. Some Teton Sioux, hiding among the nearby trees on their own horses, shouted and rushed forward, riding off with Coulter's horse. Coulter walked back to the river and reported to Lewis and Clark what had happened. Minutes later, 5 Teton Sioux appeared on the shore, calling out to talk to Lewis and Clark. Captain Clark answered, "We will not speak with you until our horse is returned." Minutes later, more than 200 Teton warriors, all armed with bows and arrows, rode out from the trees and spread out along the riverbank. Captain Lewis remembered that President Jefferson wanted them to be friends with the Teton Sioux. He quietly ordered, "Stop the boats and hold them steady here in the middle of the river." Clark, smiling, called, "We come as friends from our great chief." The chief that Clark was talking about was President Jefferson. "We invite your chiefs to come and see our boat." Clark ordered a few sailors to roll him to shore in a pirogue, and after greeting the 3 main chiefs, Clark brought 2 of them aboard the keelboat. There he and Lewis were friendly to the Teton Sioux and gave them gifts. Then Clark and the oarsmen took the chiefs back to the shore. Meanwhile, Captain Lewis stood ready on the keelboat bow, and his soldiers kept rifles in their hands or immediately by their sides in case of trouble. Everything seemed to be going well until suddenly one chief shouted, "Your gifts are not good enough. You may not return to your big boat until you give us better gifts." Sioux warriors grabbed the pirogue's rope and held it securely. Now, Clark knew that the Teton Sioux honored courage, and I wrote this word here because that's going to be your word work later. If you honor something, it means the Teton Sioux admired and respected people who acted bravely. If he showed any signs of weakness at this moment, the Tetons might attack. Even if there was no fight, any chance of a strong friendship with the Tetons could disappear. Clark whipped his sword out and, holding it high, firmly demanded, "Release our boat at once." Back on the keelboat, Lewis ordered his men, "Prepare arms. Only on my order may you fire, and not a second before." Instantly, the soldiers raised their rifles. In answer, the Tetons raised their bows and arrows, ready to shoot at the Corps of Discovery. No one moved. The silence stretched out for a long, tense moment. Then a Sioux chief told the warriors holding the rope, "Let go." They obeyed. Clark told his oarsmen, "Return to the keelboat." One of his men asked quietly, "Without you, sir?" "I gave you an order," Clark said in a voice that sounded much calmer than he actually felt. As the pirogue pushed off from the riverbank, Teton warriors surrounded Clark. Lewis could see only his friend's hat over the shoulders of the Sioux. Lewis gave orders, and as the pirogue reached the keelboat, a number of armed soldiers got into the pirogue and started back for Clark. But then, suddenly, the Tetons moved away from Clark. Clark's bravery had impressed the Tetons. The thought that Clark was brave because he stood up to them, or the Tetons thought that Clark was brave because he stood up to them. They smiled in friendship and invited the members of the expedition to their village. The explorers accepted the invitation. The Corps of Discovery had survived a dangerous situation. What they did not know was that even greater dangers and even greater victories still lay ahead. Ooh, we're going to find out more about those greater dangers and the greater victories, those like the big exciting wins that they have. We'll find out more about that this week. But for now, I would like us to talk about this word honored. Go ahead and get out your core folder, and you're going to grab your word work, honored, and you can put that folder away. Now, in the read aloud today, you heard Clark knew that the Teton Sioux honored courage. Say the word honored with me, and you'll notice that we don't really say that H. It's not honored, it's honored. We just kind of ignore that H. Honored. It's silent. When you honor something, you respect it or think it is very important. The Native Americans in the story honored courage, meaning they thought that courage was very important. An example of honored in a sentence is I honor people who are kind, meaning I think people that are kind are very important and I respect them a lot. Now, what kind of people do you honor? Do you honor people who are mean? Probably not. That's probably not something that you honor. Now, on your word work, you're going to trace honored, respell it in your neatest, nicest handwriting, and then sketch a picture of a person you honor. Who's a person that you honor or respect or think a lot about or think is very important? Then you are going to do kind of a language arts lesson here. So when you add ed to the end of a word, it can make one of three sounds. And we know all of these, don't we? We know that ed can make the t sound, the d sound, or the ed sound. So you are going to read each of these words, all that have the ed at the end, to make it past tense, right? And you are going to circle which sound it makes. So honored, d, makes that D sound, doesn't it? So you'll highlight or circle D. What about skipped? Skipped. T. What does that ED make? Highlight what it makes. What about painted? Painted. What does that one make? Winked. Winked. And smelled. Smelled. Go ahead and finish that. Send me a picture on, you know what, homeroom. And I can't wait to see those. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.